Let's look at how to position a 2D image onto a 3D surface using a modifier called UVW Map. I've got a material already made for the flooring in this apartment. If I wanted to have hardwood floors, I would probably want to use an image for that. I've got that prepared. Let's open up the material editor with the M key. Here it is. I've got a standard material named floor, and there's a bitmap connected to it here. And we can go ahead and assign that. Drag that over onto the floor. And then, of course, we need to show the map in the viewport. Here's the Show Shaded Material in Viewport button. And we see something there, but it doesn't really look very good. We could play around with the tiling parameters of this bitmap. You can see we have tiling here. Okay, and that would control the number of repeats across the surface there. But that's not enough because we also have to play around with the texture coordinates on the surface. In order for the 3D program to know how to apply a 2D image onto a surface, we need to have texture coordinates, which are also known as UV coordinates. U and V represent the dimensions of a flat image. U is the horizontal dimension and V is the vertical dimension. And the letters U and V are chosen to distinguish them from XYZ coordinate space. The grid of the world is in XYZ space. Textures are in UV space, which is different because a texture is like a piece of paper or a strip of fabric. It can be folded, it can be crumpled, it can be squashed into any sort of form or shape within 3D space. UV space is not the same as XYZ space. All right, so now let's play around with texture placement. We want to select that object, and to control the texture placement, we'll add a modifier. Go to the Modify panel, and this is an extruded line. It doesn't matter what kind of object it is, but let's add the modifier, and it's called UVW Map. And it's UVW rather than UV because in 3ds Max, there's also a third dimension that is perpendicular from the surface of the actual texture. But that's not really important. The important thing is that we're defining texture coordinates. Click on that to add it. And what you get by default is the texture is stretched to the available surface of the object. But this isn't the right size or spacing for me. The texture is actually square, and if I want to not distort the shape, then I want the texture placement or the UVs to also be square. Additionally, I will want to control the size of the boards here. These are very large. The wall is actually a foot thick here. Each one of these boards is almost a foot thick as well. I want to shrink that down. To control that, we can go into our UVW Map modifier. And you can see there are a bunch of options here for different types of mapping. We could wrap our map in a cylinder or a sphere or so on. In this case, a planar map is perfect because we're just mapping onto the floor. Then if we go down a little bit here, we've got the length and width. We could numerically enter in the length and width of this planar map if we wanted. I could put in a value of, let's say, 10 feet. And now it looks a little bit fuzzy, but it's changed the shape of this map gizmo. And we can't really see it terribly well because it's sort of penetrating inside the model. Let's move the map gizmo up a bit. I'll go into UVW Map Gizmo Subobject Mode, and then just pull that up a bit so we can see it better. And that is the texture placement. If I set the width to 10 feet as well, we can see here now what it's doing. We can position that, and we can rotate it. We grab our rotate tool, rotate it around the Z-axis. If we want it to go the other direction there. Maybe do that with angle snaps. I'll undo that with Control-Z and turn on my angle snaps. Rotate that 90 degrees. And we can also scale it. But I don't really recommend scaling if you can help it because we've got the length and width over here. And if I scale the gizmo so it's no longer at unity scale, then these numbers over here are no longer meaningful. Okay, so this is kind of conceptual. But if I take this and then scale that up by some amount, just an arbitrary amount, well, now these numbers are no longer valid. I've got a map of 10 feet by 10 feet, but then I've scaled it by some amount. And in fact, there's no real way for me to know how much I've scaled it after I've done it. That's a destructive act, and I can't actually ever get back to where I was. So don't scale if you can help it. I'm going to use Control-Z to undo that. Okay, so that's the basics of how we can control the size and placement of a texture using a UVW map modifier.